Hello, ladies and gentlemen of Bunts and Bruises YouTube and beyond, and also my Twitter. Funny enough, this is, ladies and gentlemen, the definition of flying on a whim right here. As you see on the screen very quickly, let me get the intro out of the way first before we get into things. Myself, Iceman Jurg, very familiar face here on the Bunts and Bruises channel from Bunts and Bruises, but also the sports agents of chaos that I have the privilege to do with my two guys, Justin and Podfather Rick. And with me, joining me on this little fun episode we're going to do is my guy, JB. First off, JB, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Coming at you from South Korea. It's 12:20 a.m. Thursday morning.
Ooh, you're a warrior, JB. And from our conversation before we started this, probably the most traveled person I've ever had the privilege to speak to in terms of just where he's been, and he hasn't even been that many places yet. So you already know this guy. This guy has a lot of mileage. I'm sure. Where do you fly, real quick, JB? Delta, American? What do you fly now?
It depends on where I'm going. When I'm coming to Korea or I'm traveling around America, I definitely like Delta. Um, yeah, when I flew to Japan, I actually used Korean Air when I went to
Ooh,
Japan. Actually, so yeah,
attaboy. There we go.
Korean Air
So,
is good. If you ever get a chance to fly Korean Air, fly Korean Air. The airline stewardesses, they're nice eye candy. Stick
so
your
I'll let my boys know when they love their vacation planning. But ladies and gentlemen, like I said, this is on a whim. For those that are familiar with the channel that have been here and also listened to other stuff that myself and JP have been on, we've been on Couch Coaches podcast. Of course, me being here on Bunts and Bruises before.
yeah.
We love talking hockey. Me and JV love hockey, and JB just texted me yesterday. It's like, hey man, we want to talk some hockey. The conference finals are about to start on Thursday. We just had a couple notable teams lose here in the second round. We're going to talk about as the people can see in the title, but it'll be the Oilers and the Leafs. So we're like, let's do a show. So we are live for anyone that enjoys hockey in general to talk hockey, and we're going to have some fun doing it right here, to say the very least. So JB, we're here. The 2023 Stanley Cup playoffs have been something, to say the very least. Before we get to the nitty gritty, before we get to the exact details, what have been your thoughts on the 2023 Stanley Cup playoffs as a whole?
Man, there have been quite a few upsets. Like everything that we thought about going into the playoffs, it hasn't happened. It hasn't really transpired. So I mean, I think we have to, definitely the biggest upset was definitely the Bruins getting blowing the 3-1 lead against the Panthers. And I know a lot of people didn't have the Bruins making it to the finals. I did, but I wasn't surprised that, like, if you would have told me they wouldn't make the finals, I'm not surprised. President's Trophy curse. And then I think the other thing, which we're gonna get on a bit, is that, like, I think after the first round ended, I think the betting favorites was all Canada Cup, like Toronto versus Edmonton, and both teams are out. Toronto went quietly into the good night last Friday, and the Oilers went into that good night Sunday night at home. So, yeah, no Canadian team will hoist the Stanley Cup again this year. But there have been a lot of surprises. The Kraken knocking out the Avalanche was a big surprise too. So
Yep.
you had a number 7 seed and you had a number 8 seed win in the playoffs, actually. So
Yeah, and with the Kraken themselves, a expansion team from 2 years ago. This is the second season in the NHL, first playoff appearance, and their first playoff series win. They knock out the defending Stanley Cup champions, and that right there, with them losing the second round, which we'll get to here very momentarily, is an achievement, like tip of the cap to the Seattle Kraken. What a season they had for themselves.
yeah,
So you kind of mentioned it, JP. Let's go really quick. A quick summary of the first round of the playoffs. Some of these series will be quicker than others in terms of our recap. So let's look at the Eastern Conference side of things first. You kind of mentioned the Boston Bruins. We'll save them for last year in the order of the East. So let's go on one side of things. The Carolina Hurricanes handled the New York Islanders in 6 games. I think, at least for myself, I knew the Islanders were going to make it competitive. This is a team that no matter what, they just always find a way to be in games, be in series. Last season, the way they missed the playoffs with having to start the season on the road, with their arena having to be built, just everything going against them. I wasn't surprised that they ended up missing the playoffs last year. And I also wasn't surprised that they were just barely, but were able to make it back this season as a wild card team. But the Hurricanes, as the more prominent team, way more skill position talent, not exactly the single goalie in net compared to the Islanders because Ilya Sorokin is great, but good enough goalie play to be able to get past. And also winning a road game in the playoffs for the first time in a while. It was like they had lost 9 or 10 road games in a row before
Yeah.
they had
Because
won.
they were 0-6 on the road last year in the playoffs, actually. So
Yep.
yeah, and what I was really surprised about that series, I picked them to win that series actually. Um, a lot of people had them losing that series because of just the amount of injuries that they've suffered. Actually, their
Yeah.
top 3 forwards are currently like on the shelf, but I mean, like it's a really good system, and they're getting timely goal scoring from a bunch of different people. And Frederick Anderson, he's a former Vezina trophy winner. So I mean, like he won a Vezina, right? Or was he just a finalist
Uh,
when he was with the Ducks?
I have to double check. I know he won the Jennings. I don't know if he
Jennings,
won the
yeah,
Vezina.
Vezina, yeah. But Anderson actually, a lot of people think that Carolina would have probably beat the Islanders last year had Anderson, been in net, but he missed the whole playoffs, and they went with Antti Ranta,
Right.
who played admirably for them, but I think he ran out of gas towards the end of that series with the Rangers last year. But a lot of people had the Hurricanes losing that series, which I was shocked at. I had Carolina winning that like in 5 games actually, but Sorokin for the Islanders, the he was one of I think he was probably he and Shurskinton of the Rangers.
Yeah.
Shurskin were probably the two highly touted goalies going into the playoffs actually.
Yeah, in
So
terms of guys that could just win a playoff series for you and the amount of talent they have. And Ilya Sorokin, again, one of the guys during the regular season, him, UC Saros, Connor Hellebuyck, sole reasons why their teams made the playoffs. Those three, or with
yeah,
Nashville just barely missing out because UC Saros was that good this season.
yeah,
Those guys right there. But yeah, no, I was with you. I understood why people were picking the Islanders for the upset pick, but I just didn't think that I didn't see it in this specific Islanders team. This Islanders team is still a ways off from the team that just a couple years ago made it to the back-to-back Eastern Conference Finals and pushed the Tampa Bay Lightning to the brink. Still, before this season, they were Tampa's toughest challenge in a 3-year stretch when they won the East 3 years in a row. So,
bro, yeah,
but this Islanders team, just to me, while the talent was similar, it didn't have the same feeling of any of those teams that made conference finals appearances. So, but I was with you.
yeah.
The Hurricanes ended up winning that. They go on to the second round. Their second round opponent was eventually the New Jersey Devils, who won a 7-game slobber knocker against the New York Rangers. What an up and down turn that series was,
Oh
JB.
yeah,
Yeah, the Rangers winning the first 2 games, same score for both those games, 5-1 in each one. So we're seeing in New Jersey, mind you, because the Devils had home ice advantage. So you just think to yourself, man, this Rangers team just outscored them 10-2 on home ice. Like it's just them. Like this Rangers team, after what was a Eastern Conference Finals appearance last season, which no one expected. They were a year or two ahead of schedule for that.
yeah.
The Devils, the Rangers just absolutely kept firing in this postseason. It's like, oh man, hey, there was a reason why a lot of people were favoring the Rangers to make it back to the conference finals, but the Devils, they turned to a young guy in Akira Schmid, got a little bit of playing time last season in what was a debacle of a season for New Jersey goaltending. They had 8 different goalies suit up last season, and then this year way more steady in net with Vitek Vanacek there, but
Who turned into a pumpkin?
Yeah, he got shelled early in the series, and they said, you know what? Let's give it to the rookie. Let's give it to the young guy. And Akira Schmid took the ball and he ran with it. 3 straight wins against the Rangers to go up 3-2 in the series. New York able to get a clutch Game 6 win in MSG to force that Game 7, but then it all just sputtered out. The New Jersey Devils take that Game 7 over the New York Rangers. Hats off to Igor Shesterkin. I made this comment after his loss, but it looks like the Rangers are going to give Igor the Henrik Lundqvist treatment of you can play your best in the playoffs, but your team is just going to fail in front of you because that was a failure, to say the very least, in terms of on-ice performance by the Rangers for their guy, Shesterkin. But the Devils were able to move on, and they made it to the second round to take on the Hurricanes. We'll get back to them in a moment. Let's go back to the other side of the East, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Exude their demons, JB. They finally won a first-round series for the first time since 2004, and they had to beat the Tampa Bay Lightning to do it. A matchup that we all basically knew was going to happen from December because the Bruins were this season. It was destiny. It was going to be Toronto and Tampa of Redux, and this time Toronto, they came through. Game 1, they got absolutely smoked by the Lightning. They came back in Game 2, and then the amazing thing about this series ultimately was Games 3, Game 4, Game 6, all in Tampa, all in OT. all wins for Toronto. I believe
Toronto.
the first time ever that a team won 3 road overtime games in a series.
Yeah.
So hats off to the Leafs on that one. It was not an easy task, even though it didn't look like they were 100% because Lord knows the amount of hockey these Lightning guys have had to play over the last 3-4 years. They still had to weather a storm. Tampa is never an easy opponent, no matter what. But Toronto, they were able to make it through. So what were your thoughts? I know obviously a little bit later on we're going to talk about their eventual defeat in the second round. But what are your thoughts about Toronto's victory in the first round? Just isolating that.
Yeah, I wasn't really impressed, man. So like, I'm getting a lot of pushback from my Canadian friends who are calling me a Toronto hater. But like, I was just when I was watching games, I really felt that in 4 of the 6 games and in 3 of the losses, I thought that Tampa Bay was actually the better team. I thought Tampa Bay had outplayed them. I thought that there was some bad luck. I mean, hockey, the luck's involved. Let's just be serious about it. But I didn't really like the way Toronto played. In I didn't like the way that Toronto was playing in the first round. They played a very good game 2, but game 3, game 4, and game 6, I thought that those were coin flip games, and I thought that Tampa Bay probably deserved a better fate, actually. But that's hockey for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hockey, the sport giveth, and oh boy, does the sport taketh. And you mentioned it, JB. I think for me, the biggest thing about that series that surprised me, I did pick Toronto going into it because I felt that this has to be the year. Like, they finally have to win it, right?
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah.
But I was with you in regards to the fact that I thought they got outcoached heavily. I thought John Cooper, even in defeat, showed why he is one of the top 3, top 5 coaches in all of the National Hockey League. Yeah. I think the way he got everything, I think the way that he was continuously, just besting Sheldon Keefe in terms of line matchups, in terms of 5-on-5, like it just, everything just sapped out at the end. And in part is the great play of Ilya Samsonov, who we have to give a lot of credit to with how amazing he played, because the Maple Leafs, and this also extends into their series with the Panthers, we'll talk about a little bit later, only were scoring basically 2 goals a game.
The last 2 games of the series, they had a really hard time. They had a really hard time scoring, and I definitely agree. I think John Cooper outcoached Sheldon Keefe. If I was Sheldon Keefe, I would be, updating my LinkedIn at the moment. I'm not, just in case. I don't advocate for anybody getting fired, but I think he should be updating his LinkedIn, and he should be looking around at like different job openings potentially. But they had a hard time scoring towards the end of that series. But I really thought that when Toronto won game 4, when they were down 4-1, and they came back and scored the 3 goals, like in, I think, like 6 minutes, tied up and sent overtime. When they won that game, I was like, okay, this is over with. You could kind of sort of tell that, like, I felt like if Tampa Bay would have won that game 4, they would have won that series. But I felt like their spirit was broken in that game. So, and I think the combination of all those playoff games, like, you just kind of saw they were making mistakes. Like, they just looked like a team that was actually just mentally fatigued. Actually,
I'm with you.
Yeah,
I'm with you, because honestly, it's really funny because I have to remind myself sometimes, like, if you look at some of these Tampa Bay players, I'm not talking about some of the older guys like Hedman and Stamkos. I'm talking about Sergachev. I'm talking about Cirelli, even Kucherov to an extent. Like, the amount of hockey they've played over the last, like, go back to the bubble in 2020 is absurd. Those guys are, if they didn't get over it, they're close to 100 career playoff games for a couple of these guys. And a vast majority of that has been the last couple of years. Like, since the 2020 bubble, they have basically, because, when LeBron was making his run in the NBA, just a quick comparison, like, people would add up the games that he played in the playoffs, and it's like, oh, he's played however many more regular seasons, like, comparatively compared to others. The Tampa Bay Lightning, basically, in the 3-year stretch where they won the East 3 years in a row, they basically played a whole extra regular season worth of games just in the playoffs. And I'm with you. I think it just ultimately got to them, and it was going to. Like, in the modern era, it's so difficult for a team to have a sustained level of success. Like, when you look in certain sports, with teams like the Patriots and the Spurs, those are not like that's the standard you'd love to be at, but that's the exception to the rule.
Yeah, it is.
Everyone eventually falters. And look, Tampa deserves all the credit in the world, and maybe this shortened offseason, or not shortened, excuse me, extended, because this is the first, I think, real offseason that any of those Tampa Bay guys have had in years. Because there's the 2020, you think the 2020 bubble into the start of the next season was very truncated. Then they win that cup, and the cup victory happened a little later than normal because, again, scheduling. And
it happened in the end of September. It happened. I think it happened. I think they up on September maybe 30th or something like that. And then you look, the season starts like in December that year, and they win the cup again the next year in June. So they won 2 championships in the span of 9 months, actually. So you know,
and then you add a third trip to the Stanley Cup final and the run they went on. Like this Tampa Bay team, at the end of the day, all the flowers to them, to say the very least. The second team in the modern salary cap era to repeat, the first one being the Penguins, and the closest one to repeating that we've had, because the Pens, after they won their second cup, the next year they lost in the second round. This Tampa Bay team made it back to the Stanley Cup final. It's 2 wins away from winning it again. So, and it took a monster Colorado team. So all props in the world to Tampa. But yeah, it was. I'm with you, man. I think just all that fatigue, all those games finally just caught up to those guys, and it happens. And I think, you know, they may have lost early this time, but early warning to the NHL, please do not count out. They made a terrible trade in the Tanner Jeannot trade. We could all agree on that. But the extended offseason, the first real offseason that a lot of these guys have had in years, I think this Tampa Bay team might a rested Tampa Bay Lightning team going into next season. Dangerous proposition for the NHL.
Oh, I mean, and you also look at just that division. Like, we're about to get to Boston, but I think Boston, you don't know what's going to happen with them. Like they're going to be a very different team. Toronto, we don't know what's going to happen with them. I mean, we could be just like looking at a situation where we're looking at maybe Tampa Bay and Florida duking it out, actually, in that division, actually. So
I'm with you, and honestly, it might even be, like, if we're talking early President's Trophy candidates for next season, like your top 3, top 4, I'm putting Tampa in that conversation easily. Like, it's not even close. They still have a great forward court. They still have a great blue line. They still have Vasilevsky, who, for my money, is still the best goalie in the NHL right now. Like, and they're going to actually be rested. Like, they got eliminated this time in April. The season not starting until September, October. This is the most amount of rest those guys have had in years. Like, I don't think people understand. Rest does the body really good. Rest is going to do that team.
Oh no, it definitely does.
So there was that series. Toronto, just in that moment, you know, well deserved for your first round series.
Well done.
Although I will say this next time, don't call out your opponent. Just don't do that to yourself. All right, let's finish off the Eastern Conference first round here really fast. Well, I say really fast. This might take some conjecture here. Boston Bruins, Florida Panthers. JB, because we talked about this a little bit during the regular season, then into the postseason early on. Boston Bruins set the record for most wins in the regular season, set the record for most points in the regular season, or just demolishing teams left and right, running all 4 forward lines, made the big acquisitions at the trade deadline, right, in Bertuzzi and Orlov. Great 1-2 punch in net in Ullmark and Swayman. Bergeron, like everything you wanted in a team, everything you could think of for a team, the Boston Bruins had. And they were up 3-1 on the Florida Panthers, and they collapse. And it's game 5, goes to overtime. Matthew Tkachuk taking advantage of a misplay by Linus Ullmark at net. Boom. Game 6 was a shootout between these teams. I think the final score was what, like 7-5?
7-5, yes.
7-5.
7-5.
The Panthers are just able to score a little bit more, and then game 7. The Bruins finally make the switch in net because as it comes out later, which is the least shocking thing in the world to me, that Ullmark was injured for the postseason, which wasn't surprising. Swayman comes in. He tries his best. The game goes to the Bruins take a lead, but in the final minute or so, minute and a half maybe of the third period, Florida tied
against it up. Yeah,
it goes to OT, and then Florida takes in overtime. So JB, the Bruins losing that 3-1 lead just. I think I could speak for both of us when we just think to ourselves like that. I think to me that outdoes what happened to Tampa a couple years ago, because you had the 3-1 lead. You had I don't want to make the comparison. Like that's not what I want to do. But like
Yeah.
just what first came into my mind was you had the 3-1 lead. You had them dead to right. You had it. Because I think they had the lead in Game 5, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they did, and Marshawn had a chance towards the end of regulation to like end it, and that's a shot that he makes a lot. So for me, I just think this, man. I think that you winning the President's Trophy and having the year they have is such a curse, man, because like they did not really have any kind. They didn't have to overcome anything during the regular season. Everything came so easy. It came so easy for them. And the minute that things got tough, they just couldn't handle it, man. They just couldn't, man. And it's like when they lost to Game 5, you're like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. They won Game 3 and 4 in Florida. And even when you're watching Game 6, you're like, okay, well, they have the lead. They're in control of this game, and they never did, man. It's like, like hockey is one of those sports where it's really easy. I think hockey and baseball are the easiest sports for you to blow a 3-1 lead because in hockey, a lot of it depends on your goaltender. If your goaltender craps the bed, you're probably going to end up losing the game. Whereas in basketball, there's not that much variation. Like in basketball, you're using the same players. One player will have a bad game, but you don't expect for like maybe 3 of the 5 in your starting lineup to have a bad game. But in hockey, you're playing everybody, and if your goalie has a bad game, you're probably going to end up losing that game. So it's not shocking that they blew a 3-1 lead. I think it's shocking that they blew the 3-1 lead with the regular season that they had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you. This is also, we're talking about hockey, the only sport, or not the only, excuse me, because it did happen once in baseball, but I could say this, the only sport with multiple 0-3 comebacks. 4 times in the history of the NHL has a team rallied from down 0-3 in a series to come back and do the reverse sweep. So, and I'm with you. Just the regular season is what makes this the topic of conversation it is that the Bruins had, because like dead to right, this was the best team in hockey all year round. Allmark is probably going to end up winning the Vezina because it's a regular season award.
Yeah.
Like I feel I mentioned that not to take anything away from him, but just to remind the people, because I feel like once we get to the postseason, people always bring up awards and they mix in the postseason. I'm like, no, chief, different.
It's for the regular. It's for the regular season. The regular season, like I'm a Dallas fan, man. I saw Marty Turkle have these amazing regular seasons, like in the 2000s, and then he would crap the bed in the playoffs. I mean, it's a different game, man. It's a different game, and you match up against a team that you don't match up well with. Your goalie can get hung out to dry. Jake Ottinger is a very good goalie. He did not play very well against Seattle, though. I mean, he did in Game 7. He played an awesome Game 7, but goaltending is so. There's a lot of variation with it. Like for instance, like Florida goes with Sergei Bobrovsky, like in Game 5. I mean, he looked like the guy that was in Columbus, and he had sucked. Bobrovsky has sucked since he came to Florida. Yeah. He looks like a legit Vezina like nominee candidate the way he's been playing the last like 7 games.
And he's won it twice. People forget that because of how bad it's been in Florida. He's won that Vezina twice.
Twice. Yeah. But he came in and he changed the series, man. And like we'll get into more of his play later in the next round, but I mean, he made the save when he had to. He didn't have a good Game 6, but he did enough. He did enough in that Game 6. And in Game 7, I mean, he hasn't. The thing that I think has hurt Florida the last few years is that he's let in a bunch of like bad goals. He's let in a bunch of softies. He hasn't done that really this postseason. He's let in maybe a bad goal here and there, but he's the stuff that he should be saving. He's saving.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you right there. He has performed way better in this postseason, and like straight up is the reason why they are at the point where they are, which is currently the conference finals. We'll get back to Florida and them in a brief moment. Let's head over to the West really fast here. Just a quick rundown of the first round. So we kind of talked it already. The Seattle Kraken upsetting the Colorado Avalanche, a series that really went back and forth. For the Avs, obviously shorthanded throughout the postseason. Gabriel Landeskog missed again, and not only this season, but also because of a procedure he got. Gabriel Landeskog will miss the entirety of the next 2023-2024 season. Hats off. Hope he is able to get back on the ice because, JB, I think, again, speak for both of us. I think my biggest thing for athletes is always getting to end things on your term potentially, and him having to get this procedure. Hope he's able to get back on the ice, even if will he be the same? It's a question mark, but hopefully he's able to get back, because like that's not how you want it to end for a guy who consistently in his career has been a really good player for the Colorado Avalanche. So the Avs, without their captain, that's the big thing. So without their captain, boom, Valery Nichushkin has to leave the playoffs after game 2 or game 3 of the series for reasons. We'll say that reasons. And just Cale Makar even getting suspended for a game in the series, which Cale, boneheaded freaking play. Love you, man, but boneheaded freaking play that you did at the end of game 5.
And that changed the series too, because I think that if he plays in that game 5, I think that they win that game 5. I mean, like he didn't play that game 5, and just kudos to the Kraken, man. If you would have told me going into that series that it would be competitive, I'm like, okay, I think it's competitive. But if you would have told me, hey, the Kraken are going to score the first goal in every game of that series, and they're going to win 3 times in altitude, I would have said, "Oh man, you're smoking something." But I mean that's the hockey playoffs for us. They won 3 times on the road. They won a game 5 when it was 2-2, and they won a game 7 when it was 3-3. And they scored the first 2 goals in game 7. Kudos to the Kraken, man. But I think if you're a Colorado fan, I don't think you should feel infuriated. Man, I don't think their goal. I don't think that how do you pronounce their goalie's name?
That's how I said
Gorgiev. I don't think he played poorly, actually. I don't think so. I just think it was one of those things where I just think that they were banged up. They didn't have all their guns, and it's just one of those things where, McKinnon and Rantanen, they played well, but they didn't get that depth scoring like they had gotten last year. And I just think it's one of those things where you just kind of just shake it off. You're like, it's hockey. We're gonna have McKinnon back. We're gonna have Rantanen back, and we're probably gonna add some free agents, and hopefully Valerie can he can settle what's going on, because that was a disturbing story that that broke of the woman being in his hotel room drunk, and it's like 3 a.m. He's nowhere to be found, and she assaulted police officers. I don't know what's going on in that story. I would love to be a fly in I would love to be a fly in Joe Sakic's office, actually.
Joe Sakic, I think ever since he became a GM, one of the most calm, cool, collected guys. Probably must have been like, what the, and then ended it right there.
But
I'm with you, man. I think ultimately for Colorado, I just, because the biggest thing for them was what was the level of play in that going to be like this season. I think Gorgiev did the best he could for the task he was dealt, which was being a number 1 goalie for the first time in his career, but also now being the number 1 goalie for the team that just won the cup last year. I think he did an admirable job. Can he improve? Of course, but I think he did fine enough. I think the defense was just the offense came and went in that series for Colorado. And the biggest thing with Seattle this season was that the Seattle Kraken, they were not a great defensive team. The play in net was very shaky during a lot of the regular season. Martin Jones at one point overtook Phil Grubauer. Phil Grubauer, the guy that they ironically took from the Colorado Avalanche. But it was the scoring that made Seattle as great as they were, and that showed in the playoffs for them. Like 16 different guys on that roster scored at least 1 goal in the playoffs. Good Lord, man.
They have like kind of like just like one of these like kind of funky teams that's really hard to match up with, because they don't have and what might be hard for them to like have a deep playoff run is because they don't have that star. But I think that when it's kind of easier to prepare for a team when they have a star, you're like, okay, we're going against Dallas. We need to shut down Hintz, Pavelski, and Robertson. We need to worry about Tyler Seguin. We need to worry about Jamie Benn and these guys, whatever. But like with Seattle, who do you game plan for? Because it's like they have what's really their team is like so clunky. It's like you have like 3. You have like 1 number 3 line. You have 3 number 2 lines. Actually, it's a really clunky team. Now, I think Bernier's actually could turn into a star. He had a really nice rookie year, actually, very good rookie year. I know people are saying that Stuart Skinner is probably going to win the Calder Trophy, but I think Bernier's like deserves like definitely consideration actually as well for the year he had.
I'm with you. I think Matty Beniers, for me, he was my favorite for the Calder going in. And look, Stuart Skinner had a good rookie season, but I'd be hard pressed to not give it to Matty Beniers for the job that he did for the Seattle Kraken here. And like you said, JP, I think that's the perfect thing to say about Seattle. they're not a first line team, but they are basically 3 second lines and a third line. Like that's that the
Yeah,
way that Dave Haxtell handled that team. Like
yeah.
I got to give a lot of credit because post Philly, I was very low on Dave Haxtell. I questioned the Dave Haxtell hiring when the team came in. A lot of people questioned Ron Francis at the expansion draft, which I think still bears fruit. I think there were still questionable picks made by the Kraken coming into their existence. But clearly, some of the guys that they have selected have paid off. Matty Beniers, great rookie season. Jared McCann, 40 goals. Like,
I know, yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Jordan Eberle, steady veteran. Oliver Bjorkstrand, who they got last season because Columbus had to cap dump it, steady veteran.
Yeah.
Like,
Yanni Gord,
so much.
Stanley Cup champion, Jaden Schwartz. I mean, they don't have a starting team, but they have a lot of good players on that team. They have a lot of good players on that team. Actually, they're very deep.
I'm convinced, honestly, if you added a number one defenseman and at least slightly above league average goaltending, I think they could have made a dark horse run to the conference finals. Like this team is a number one blue liner and a just better starting goaltending play away from being extremely dangerous. Because we've seen teams come out of nowhere and make runs. The Kraken had everything, and it was just one team that stood in their way, particularly one man. We'll get into that in a little bit.
Everybody can make the conference finals seasons except for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, and the Minnesota Wild. Speaking of which,
who we can get into too as well.
Yes, let's actually we're going to kind of talk about two series winners here really fast because it was actually a very similar way how both these series played out. Down 2-1 after 3 games were both the Dallas Stars and the Edmonton Oilers. Funny enough, JB. It was a similar thing. Both those teams lost their game threes. Minnesota, I want to say they had a lot of scoring in game 3. I want to say their win was 5-2.
They won 5-1 or 5-2 or something like, or it may have been 6-2 because I watched the game. I was really infuriated with how Dallas came out so flat in that game. I was like, "What are you guys doing, man?"
So Minnesota wins that game 3 like that, and meanwhile in the Vegas Oilers Kings series, the Kings win game 3. I want to say it happened in it was overtime. Because it was the whole thing with the potential high stick and all that. And Oilers fans were not happy, to say the very least. Oilers fans still not happy about the officiating in these playoffs, but both the Stars and the Oilers overcome those game 3s. Edmonton 3 straight wins because Draisaitl and McDavid are just absolute beasts, and the power play was godly this postseason. 5-on-5 could use a little bit of work, but the power play was absolutely lights out for the Oilers. They end up winning 3 straight to go to advance past the Kings, and the Stars locked it in. Jake Ottinger, phenomenal performance for him. Like after those first 3 games, did a great job.
He only gave up 3 goals he gave up 3 goals the last 3 games of the series. He gave up 2 in game 5 in game 4, and then he gave up 1 in game, and he had the shutout in game 5. So
so extremely talented, which is not a surprise from last season when the Stars were this close to potentially upsetting the Calgary Flames in the playoffs. You saw from last year, Jake Onger is the guy, and I think he only continued to prove that in the first round. So the Stars and the Oilers both advancing past the first round, going into the second round. The Stars, a date with the Seattle Kraken, and the Edmonton Oilers, a date with the Vegas Golden Knights, who just absolutely manhandled the Winnipeg Jets, to say the very least.
And made poor Rick Bowness. Rick Bowness is 67, 68 years old. He went on a tirade at the end of the game. That was like one of the shortest press conferences. And I don't blame him.
I agree.
That their performance. Here's my thing. It's one thing for you to lose, but like for you to just have guys on the team that look like they didn't give a shit, that's have some pride. Have some pride. Like if you're gonna lose, at least give an effort when you lose. But they just gave up. They were like me and Chris always say, like the guys on NBA TNT say. I think after the first period of that game 5, like Winnipeg was like 1, 2, 3 Cancun.
Yeah. Honestly, I would say even before that game 5, dude. I would say game 4. Like
it was the last competitive game of that series was game 3. Game 4, game 5, they no showed. And speaking of the Wild gave a really bad effort in game 5. It's 2-2. If you win game 5, you have game 6 home. You get shut out or whatever. And what is Minnesota doing? Because here's my thing, man. Like the greatest indicator of future performance is past performance. Everson's a lousy coach. He has not won a playoff series. Right. I think he won 1 playoff series his whole career in minor leagues and everything. He has a lousy playoff record. He's constantly getting out coached. And And what are you going to do? Well, so you're going to lose Matt Dumba. You're going to lose one of your top four defensemen because you're not going to be able to pay him back. How can you sit there with a straight face and look at your fan base and tell your fan base, we're doing everything we can to improve the team. We want this team to win playoff series. They haven't won a playoff series since 2015. They're going to end up running it back. And I'm going to be honest with you, man, it would not surprise me next year. I'm not going to say they're not going to make the playoffs, but they were they were in the mid hundreds this year. It wouldn't surprise me if they go down into like if they drop down like into like the mid 90s next year.
Yeah, I'm with you. And part of that is, Billy Guerin, for his decision that he made when he took over, and he said, we're like, if Parise and Suter were not going to perform, we're not going to keep those cap hits. Well, they weren't going to perform equal to the cap hits that they had signed just before the last lockout.
And he cut it, and he cut him, yeah.
And they get bought out, and it's just that's the salary cap hamstring, because I've kind of had this conversation, JB, and let's give a light assumption that the salary cap will increase at least $1 million this offseason. It could increase more, but we already know why that's not happening. But let's say that $82.5 million will be the cap for next season. Every other team in the NHL, 30 other teams have $82.5 million cap. The two teams that don't, the Minnesota Wild, because they're hamstrung with $15 million of dead cap, and the Arizona Coyotes, because realistically they only meet the cap floor because of phantom contracts. Aside from those two teams, everyone else is running on $82.5 million of cap, but the Minnesota Wild can't do that. And they've tried, but like you said, they're going to lose Matt Dumba. I wouldn't be surprised if they may even lose another defenseman this offseason, because I think you got to trade one of those guys. They're just, at some point, I was talking about continuity before with some of the other teams. At some point, continuity becomes stale. Right? Like, it's a thing. A coach loses a locker room, right? Line combinations that worked for the last 2 years just aren't working anymore. I think the Minnesota Wild needs some sort of shift and again, I know it's tough, and I do want to give Billy Guerin a little bit of props, because he has had to deal with a cap strap that no one else has to deal with. And it's not his fault. It's his predecessor who signed the contracts that he had to buy out, that he now needs to maneuver under. I think he's doing his best. I would kind of equate it to Kyle Dubas, who, had the pandemic never happened, the salary cap would probably be closer to $90 million right now. And it's a lot easier to justify the four guys they have at $90 million cap compared to 81. And so Billy Guerin's done his best, but I'm with you. Minnesota, I wouldn't be surprised if they take a step back, because Phil Gustafson, correct me if I'm wrong, is he not a free agent next offseason? Like, do they not have to pay him?
Yeah. I think he maybe is next offseason, but you have to do something with the coach, though. I mean, like, this is the same story. So, like, look, you made him the coach, and the year after COVID, you went toe to toe with Vegas, and you lost in 7, which wasn't bad. Vegas made the conference finals. Okay. But you look last year, you're up 2-1 against the Blues. You lose 3 in a row. You lose that series against the Blues. And the Blues weren't that good last year either. They weren't that. The Blues were not that good last year. They should have been able to win that series. And they had acquired Fleury, and they had done all this other stuff. Same thing this year. You're up 2-1 against Dallas. And, like, look, I think a lot of people had Dallas winning. I think that maybe about 60% of the experts had Dallas winning. Maybe 40% had Minnesota winning. But you lose 3 in a row. And not only did you lose 3 in a row, but you got blown out in 3 games, essentially, like you did the year before against St. Louis. So it's the same story. And you can't tell me that in that locker room that when the going gets tough, the guys are like, well, Dean Everson is gonna push the right buttons. They don't believe he is. And Dean Everson doesn't either. And Dean Everson, what's bothersome to me about a coach, your coach has to be a leader. He's a bad leader. When things go wrong, he starts blaming refereeing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he does.
Yeah, and in this league, you can't do that, because these officials, they will punish you.
They will.
Like NHL officiating. For any NFL fans that might happen upon this podcast one day and you get to this point, if you think NFL officiating is bad, my friends, I present to you Stanley Cup playoff officiating, because it is vastly different from the regular season. Vastly different. You can get away with murder or nearly snapping a 20-year-old's neck off, like Sam Bennett did in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Things like that happen in the NHL that just don't happen in other leagues. That's how it goes. But no, I'm with you. I think it's funny. Both Minnesota and Winnipeg are, a lot of teams here with these losses need to they need to do some soul searching this offseason, JB. And I think those are 2 teams that are going to have to do that, because
I would say Winnipeg's probably not going to make the playoffs next year. Like, I would be very shocked if they make the playoffs next year. Like, I don't see that happening. Like, so Nashville, have a decent offseason. You'll be in the dance next year.
I'm convinced because it's hard to always say that teams need to rebuild because it's not as simple as just trade everything away and boom,
Yeah,
you just go from there. Not only is the process itself could take who knows how long, but it's also the fans, like a commitment to the fans. That is a real thing that these teams need to think about. If you're Winnipeg, who already struggles with bringing guys to that market, like we see this all the time with contracts, JB. When guys have modified no move clause and like an 8-team no trade list, what's the generic joke? Though those 8 teams on the no trade list are the 7 Canadian teams and Buffalo, and
yeah,
that's a real thing. But when an exception is made for a Canadian team, it's usually Toronto, Edmonton, or maybe the one other team that might be doing good, and it's
yeah.
rarely ever Winnipeg. Like it's tough for Winnipeg. So from that perspective, I get why it's been tough. But just me personally, what I would do. I'm with you because you were mentioning Rick Bonus earlier in his tirade he went on. There's a lot of guys on this team that got to be shipped off. Like Shifley
Yeah,
needs to be gone. Blake Wheeler
yeah,
should have been gone yesterday, but his contract
yeah.
is dang near immovable.
Well, I think he's a free agent this year. I think
Is
maybe,
he? No,
or does he have,
I thought he had one more
or
year at least.
oh, I think he does. But I think that you can move him and be like,
Yeah,
look, Blake, we're probably not going to contend. You don't have many years left. Why don't we send you to a playoff team? Would you be happy with that? And
yeah.
I think that he would just go ahead and he would say yes to that. But
Yeah.
yeah, no,
And if you got to
a lot of
retain, I think the thing is for some of these teams with the contracts, if you got to retain, do just retain to get him out of there. I would rather for Blake Wheeler's deal, if I need to retain a quarter of it to get him off the team, I'd be
I
willing
would
to
do
do
it.
that
Yeah. Oh yeah,
because
yeah. You need to
because at some
because
point it's like just the locker room chemistry. There's a reason he was stripped of the captaincy.
oh yeah, and with him saying like, "Oh well, he should have kept that in house," and I'm like, Rick Bonus probably has said that to you guys ever since like the middle of January. He's probably been
Yeah.
saying the same thing to you, so it's not like he's like, "Oh well, guys, you did a really good job today. It just wasn't our day. Let's go get Pizza Hut." No, Rick Bonus is a straight shooter. He told you guys to your face that. So I don't understand what the deal is. Like, what he if he's talking bad about you in your face and then he said it to the media at the end of the year. I don't understand what the big deal is. I didn't understand. Just it seems like Blake Wheeler just isn't a fan of a bonus.
Right.
So
And
yeah,
and for me, between Blake Wheeler and Rick Bonus, I'm keeping Rick Bonus above him easily, very easily. So
yeah,
yeah, a lot of soul searching needs to be done with a couple of these teams that have lost in the first round, and that
yeah,
continues in the second round. Let's run through the second round series here, real
yeah.
quick, JB, going into the conference finals. So second round, excuse me, Carolina defeating the New Jersey Devils, smoked them, and even the
Yes.
game that New Jersey won, it was an 8-4 victory. It was not close. Whoever won that series won big in each game,
Yeah.
and it was not even
Except for
close.
game five. Game five went to
Right,
overtime.
right.
Jesper.
Yeah.
Jesper ended it.
They saved the best for last, the closest game for
Yes,
last.
game for last,
But
yeah.
but aside from that, Carolina handily beating the Devils, they make it back to the conference finals, which they last made in 2019, before the Boston Bruins handled them that postseason. So shout out to Carolina, shout out to the Devils for the great season they had. They deserve a lot of credit in what
Yeah.
their offseason could potentially be. Get Luke Hughes in that lineup next season. Luke and Jack could be something fun to say at the very least, because Jack Hughes, if he didn't get 100 points, I think he had 99 this season. Him and Nico Hischier are a great 1-2 punch down the middle. If some of their guys take that next level forward next season, they're gonna be
Yeah,
very
I
interesting
think
too.
I think the Devils have a bright future. I mean, I think that they jumped out of nowhere. I think that people had them maybe in the playoffs, but they thought of them more as maybe a wild card team. But
Yeah,
like for them to finish top three, and what they did to the Rangers, man, like they basically after game three, they dominated that series, man, after
yep,
game three. So I think that actually think of all the teams that have lost in the playoffs, I think New Jersey probably they shouldn't feel as bad.
yeah.
The Brass in New Jersey shouldn't feel as bad actually. So
I'm with you.
um
I think, and also comparatively to the teams that we've mentioned here, I think they're the team that needs to do the least amount to their roster
yeah, it's the
next season.
roster,
Now,
yeah.
I don't say that meaning that they don't have flaws, but what I mean is that I think some of the Devils' things that could make them even better next season are more internal. It's like figuring Luke Hughes into the lineup. It's some of those young guys finally being able to take that next step, whether it's
Oh yeah,
improving on their time in the NHL
yeah,
or maybe cracking the NHL on a full-time basis. Like
yeah,
that's what the future of the New Jersey Devil is compared to a
yeah,
lot of these teams that we talked about. So shout out to them. And that so that's the East for Carolina. And then this series, 5 games, they go up 3-0 at one point, barely
yeah,
lose game 4, but handle the game 5 victory in OT. Florida Panthers defeat the Toronto Maple Leafs in 5 games. We're gonna sing the Mortem of the Leafs here in a couple moments. Once we just briefly run through the conference finals, but Florida Panthers, JB, the surprise run continues. They're in the conference finals.
Well, you know what? I don't think we should be that surprised. So let's think about it. So Florida was the 8th seed this year. Florida was not what you would consider a traditional 8th seed. So
Right.
they won the President's Trophy last year.
Right.
Now they had injuries, like like the Anthony Duclair missing a big part of the year that hurt them. Anthony
Right.
Duclair is a top 6 forward. I mean, he can score. I mean, you can even see now that he's come back, they have more of an offensive punch. I think that they had some injuries at the beginning of the year, and I think that the thing that I just think is dangerous with a team like Florida, they're not a traditional. They weren't a traditional number 8 seed because they had won the President's Trophy the year before. They had to play down their perfect hockey the last 6 weeks for them to even make the playoffs. So they have been battling adversity the last 6 weeks, and that's something that Boston didn't have to deal with adversity the whole year. And let's be real, Toronto didn't really have to deal with that much adversity this year.
Yeah.
Florida did, and Florida, man, like they came in and they were like, you guys said you wanted us. Well, you can have all of us. And I told my Toronto Maple Leaf fans, my friends who are Leaf fans, I told them, I'm like, they will say, yeah, we want Florida. I'm like, be careful what you wish for. You might get it. That's what I told them before the season started, and they got it.
And they got it. Yeah. No, so the reason why I call it a surprise run is because while they did win the President's Trophy last season, you have to think of this team like is different from last year because you make the Huberdeau Tkachuk deal, massive trade, which also involves selling off Uyghur. So that's one of your top 4 D men from last season gone. Yeah. You lose Ben Chiarot, you lose Claude Giroux. You lost a lot of what was a part of that team, including with trade deadline pickups. And you also have that coaching change of letting Brunette go and going with Paul Maurice. And with Paul Maurice, very up and down on him. He's a good coach. He's a good guy overall, but he has been tactically outworked in previous playoff series past. And also early up, I think Bobrovsky and Hellebuyck, I think Maurice, in terms of his career, I think his goalies have a little bit of a reputation of not performing in the playoffs since Hellebuyck and now Bobrovsky. That's why I call them the surprise. But like you said, the things that have broken right for them, Tkachuk being a beast as per usual, that guy is going to be the future of the franchise for so long, and really alleviates the pressure off of Barkov. Aaron Ekblad being the definitive guy on that team in terms of leading the blue line. Duclair and the scoring punch he provides to that squad. Carter Verhaeghe.
Carter Verhaeghe, yeah, man. And
playoff performer.
Who's that defenseman that they have? That guy who they have on a power play? I can't think of his name right now. I'm sorry, man. You played very well against Boston.
I'm with you. Let me pull up the roster right now as we talk about the Panthers blue line here. Brandon Montour. Oh my God, Brandon Montour's been a beast. Brandon Montour, career year for him.
Montour's been playing very well. Yeah, he's playing with a lot of confidence too. Yeah, you can just tell the way he's shooting the puck, and he was a big reason why they won that Game 7 against Boston. Montour. So I agree with you. But they still had a lot of people still from that roster that have won. They had very successful years, 2021 and 2022. So, I mean, you made the trade with Tkachuk. You got rid of a few of your players, but they still have a very skilled team. So, shout out to Florida, man. They went from looking like they weren't going to make the playoffs, and it would have been a really big disappointment if they had missed the playoffs. So, now you're one of the final 4 teams left. So,
and they just squeaked by, in part because the Pittsburgh Penguins just losing late in the regular season for absolutely no reason.
Some of the games that they lost, they lost to the Blackhawks. The Blackhawks were coming on a back-to-back, and I'm like, you lost that game, I guess Sidney Crosby and Malkin and those guys were just they were like, look, we won 3 championships. This team doesn't have it. Let's have a proper off season.
Yeah,
we haven't had one of those in a long time.
Oh my God! And by the way, just really quick, note about the Panthers about Brendan Montour career year with the team this season. They acquired him back on April 10th, 2021 for just a third round pick. Just want to throw that out there for the Panthers and how happy they are with him this season because again, career year for him. Always was a steady defenseman going into the season, but 73 points in the regular season and then 9 so far in the postseason with 6 goals. Also helped really torch the Toronto Maple Leafs as well. And again, we were mentioning it before, but Sergei Bobrovsky just in moments standing on his head. What I think this was the first season since Bobrovsky's been in Florida to where if the Maple Leafs got the lead early, which they did in 2 of the games, I want to say.
They did.
They like Bobrovsky in his first couple years in Florida, it felt like the game would have been a wash. It would have become a 5-1 win for the other team. But this version of him, as well as the Panthers blue line helping him out and the team in general, but this version of Bobrovsky, most confidence he's had in Florida. And you mentioned, JB, when it comes to a goalie and what they could do for you, a goalie with confidence is the most dangerous thing to play against because that is a dude that just feels like every single shot you throw his way, he's going to stop it.
I'm thinking of J.S. Jaguar in 2003. Yeah, man.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
He was different.
Yeah, he was, man. He single-handedly he won the Conn Smythe and he lost. I mean, that guy had a hell of a he went toe-to-toe with Brodeur in the finals. Yeah.
So him, you think, Dominic Hasek leading the Sabres one time to the Stanley Cup final, the Herculean effort that took. Tim Thomas, the Boston Bruins, the year that they won the Cup,
in 2011.
He was different. There's a reason why they haven't won a Cup final since Tim Thomas left the team. There's a reason for that because that dude there was a 3-4 year stretch where he was the guy in the NHL for the Boston Bruins. So.
And the year they blew the 3-0 lead against Philly, he was hurt that year. It was unfortunately Tuukka Rask was their goalie. Poor guy. Yeah, poor guy. Yeah. Florida definitely. But I'll say this though, I think Toronto, they made things a little easier than it had to be. You have to get bodies in front of Bobrovsky. They did not make him uncomfortable. And speaking of goalies going on runs, like what Fleury did with the Vegas Golden Knights when they made the finals, like he was unbelievable. Through the Western Conference, but he got scorched in the finals actually. So
and even the 2 times since then that the Vegas Golden Knights have gone far. It was against your Stars in the bubble, and then a year later against the Montreal Canadiens. And Fleury had that miscue in Game 3.
Game 3,
of that Montreal series.
Fleury,
it's one of those things, man.
And Fleury, I also want to say this. I think Fleury has blown 3-1 leads, I think 3 or 4 times in his career, actually, because remember when the Sharks got him in 2019? Remember when Pavelski, the controversial major, and the Golden Knights came back? The Sharks beat them. And then also he blew a 3-1 lead a couple of times when he was with Pittsburgh. I think he blew a 3-1 lead in 2011 against Tampa.
Yeah.
And he blew a 3-1 lead against the Rangers as well in 2014. So
I remember that series. Oh my god. Yeah. The Rangers made it to the Cup final that year. That was a big year for Henrik Lundqvist that year. But Mark, oh my god, the realization that Marc-Andre Fleury is the Doc Rivers of coaches. Good lord. But anyways, the Florida Panthers Carolina Hurricanes is our Eastern Conference final matchup. We'll give our predictions for the conference finals here in a moment. Let's go to the West really fast. Vegas Golden Knights, Edmonton Oilers. Series was going back and forth, tied at 2 games apiece. Vegas in Game 5 scored 3 goals in a row to take a 4-2 lead, 4-2 win there for a 3-2 lead, and then Game 6 was just immediately 3 goals between the 2 clubs in the first couple of minutes of the game, and Edmonton has a lead. But again, just gangbusters. Vegas, they just absolutely caved Stuart Skinner in. And Jay Woodcroft, if there is one thing that I think totally misplayed this season, from last year, this team making it to the conference finals, to this season now losing the second round. I know Jack Campbell was not impressive in the first month and a half of the season. I know he's been relegated to backup, but I would have. There's something about these coaches not changing their guys.
They should have gone with him, and I got into I got into like a debate with my friend who likes the Maple Leafs because he was like, "Oh, Campbell was so bad," and I'm like, "But like Campbell has performed in the playoffs before. Stuart Skinner has never had any playoff experience. Like, and like when people are going to say, well, Campbell never won a playoff series. Okay, I get that, but he played well enough for the Leafs to win. Like
Yeah.
the Leafs really. Let's just be honest. Like nobody, Frederick Anderson did win a playoff series with the Maple Leafs, but he's won two this year with the Carolina Hurricanes. Nobody wins with Toronto halfway. So I mean, I think that they should have gone with. I think that they should have gone with Campbell, and Campbell was a big reason why they even made it to the second round because you have to remember in Game 4 they were down 3-0 against the Kings, and they brought Campbell in, and Campbell basically
Yep.
won that game from him, and then they went back to Skinner again. You know,
Yeah, and they got lucky because the reason they won was straight up offense. I think the last two games of the Kings series, they scored a combined 11 or 12 goals between those two games, or something along those lines. Like they didn't make it this far because of goaltending. And look, Stuart Skinner, he had a great regular season, had a bright future, was an all-star this season. Like you give the credit where credit's due, but you also have to make that decision, man. And that's why coaches, like, it's such the thing in hockey compared to the other sports. There's 2 to 3 decisions per game that you make as a coach where it's like you can point to this as the reason why it cost the team a certain game or a series even. And it's Woodcroft not switching to Campbell. It's Montgomery in the first round not switching to Jeremy Swayman after game 5 at least. You know, if you were still gonna keep Omar going into game 5, Swayman should have gotten both 6 and 7 and not just 7. And then the Leafs, I think they shouldn't have put Samsonov to start in game 3. I think it should have been Joseph Wall because I think you could tell Samsonov was kind of similar to Olmark. Like he was hampered.
He was hurt.
And it was affecting him. And like there needs to be some sort of change. And I'm not saying Skinner part of the reason was because of injury. I just don't think he played to his level in this playoffs.
Yeah.
I think we need to kind of get it out of our heads that we have to run with the starter through and through. Like
no, you don't have to.
You can make the switch at the right time. It's funny because you mentioned Everson earlier, JB. He made the baffling decision from game 1 to game 2 to just go to Fleury, and Fleury got shelled in game 2 of the Stars Wild series. And like, obviously he made a bad decision with switching goalies in that so early, but you can't I feel like some of these coaches get in their own heads more. You can't let that be the standard of, okay, let me just not switch my guy. Because especially for Boston, Toronto, your backup goalie at 100% or your starter at 65, 70%, play the guy that's healthy, man. And especially because we're starting to get to a point here, JB. There are a lot of really good backup goalies in this league.
Oh, yeah, there are. Well, yeah.
Jeremy Swayman could be a starter on most teams. Joseph Wall is the starter of the future in Toronto. Like,
yeah. And I mean, let's just be honest. You shouldn't be using Dean Everson as any kind of case study unless you, unless you're doing a case study of like what can a coach do to lose us a playoff series? That's how you use Dean Everson as like that. And I'm sorry, Dean, I don't dislike you. If you hear this, I don't hate you. You seem like a pretty nice guy, but you know, hey man, you need to do better in the playoffs, man. That's all I have to say. But
and the last series to talk about, your Stars, JB, 7 games with the Seattle Kraken. Again, shout out Seattle. It was it when did you guys, what was the game that you guys scored first in the series? Because was it game 1 when Pavelski scored first, or did Seattle score first?
Yeah. So Pavelski scored. They scored first in game 1. I want to say game 1, game 2, game 4, game 5, and game 7.
That's wild.
Yeah. But Pavelski had that unbelievable game 1, and man, I was heartbroken when they lost that game 1 in overtime. And like, that's been their kryptonite the whole year, man. They are so bad in overtime. Anytime they go into overtime, I think that they're going to lose. So like, I was, so when I came back from Thailand, actually, this is no joke. They had an 8-game homestand, and that homestand, they won 4 games. They lost 1 game in the regulation, and then they lost 3 overtime games on that 8-game homestand. And they lost. I kid you not. They lost back-to-back games before the All-Star break, 3-2 in overtime.
Oh my god!
And it was a joke. I was like, I'm on Yahoo Sports. I'm dog sitting for my friend at the time. My friend went back to America, and I took care of his dog. I was in Busan, South Korea, and I'm playing with the dog, and I get the alert that it's in overtime, and I just look at the dog. I'm like, Didi, the dog's name is Didi. I'm like, Didi, we're gonna lose 3-2. And she's just looking at me like, what is this human talking about? What do you mean 3-2? And then, like, literally, like 2 minutes later, it pops on my phone. I was like, see, Didi, I told you 3-2. And the dog's just like looking at the phone. I was having conversations with the dog about like how bad we are in overtime at that point.
Hey, Dallas Stars overtime. Dallas Stars overtime hockey will do that to you. That's just how it goes. But you guys able to get past the Kraken, able to weather that storm. Seattle goes down once again. Props to Seattle. Flowers to you. Had an incredible playoffs, but the Dallas Stars make it to the Western Conference Finals yet again. And so now we have, ain't it funny, JB, how in the NBA we have bubble rematches, and now in the NHL, at least on the Western side of things,
we have a bubble rematch too.
We got a bubble rematch. So let's go here really fast with these two series here. Thoughts and predictions. First on the Western Conference Finals, JB. Who do you got and why?
Okay. Actually, I hate to do this. I'm gonna refrain because I don't usually pick my team.
Sure.
I think it's gonna be a good series. Now, I will say this. Mark Stone is healthy. Mark Stone being healthy is a dangerous thing. He's a very good defensive forward, and he also can score. He can also score as well too. I think, to me, this is probably going to come down to goaltending. Is Ottinger gonna play like he did against Minnesota, which was pretty good, or is he going to play more like he did against Seattle, which was like average? I think it's going to come down to which goalie can make just the save when they have to. Like, are you letting in soft goals, or are you making the stops when you have to? And I don't know what's going on with Vegas's goalie, Brossoit. I don't know if he's out for the playoffs because their backup played very well that last game. Edmonton.
Hill, he took over the last couple games of that series. I think he's going to get the start. I think if he won them that series, I think he more than deserves the chance to start this next one.
So I'll say this. I think the series is going to be a good one. I think it's at least going to go 6. I'm gonna refrain from making a prediction. So
I'm with you there. I'd be shocked if this series finishes before 6. Like I think. Peter, funny enough, Peter DeBoer going up against his former team now. Bruce Cassidy and the Vegas Knights against DeBoer and the Stars. I will say this. One thing that'll be interesting here, and I love this going into the second round, was that Jack Eichel, this is his first playoffs. We got to finally see McDavid and Eichel against each other in a playoff series, which was fun to say the very least. And now, so far in the playoffs, Jack Eichel, 14 points in 11 games. Pretty good, to say the very least. Like, he has been good. Vegas has looked good, even with the Oilers series taking an extra game. Like they've clearly shown that they're extremely talented. Dallas, while slightly shaky from the second round, like I just think surprise teams do that to you, and I think Seattle is the definition of a surprise team, and I think Dallas was able to weather the storm. This is difficult. This is very difficult. But if I had to get a very slight edge, I would say Stars in 7. Because I think ultimately a game 7, if I have to boil it down to play in net, I'm going to give you guys the edge over Vegas. Again, just slightly. And again, if the series goes the other way, it wouldn't surprise me. Like, we're at a point now where these 4 remaining teams are just so good. You can make an argument for any of these 4 teams to go to the Stanley Cup final. Like it's like if anyone says Vegas or Dallas, not a surprise. If anyone at this point says Carolina or Florida, it's not a surprise. So that being said, Florida and Carolina, who you got?
This is a tough one, man, because I can see this one going anyway. If Carolina had all of their like big guns for this series, I would maybe say Carolina in 5, but they don't. Are the guys that have been scoring, are they going to be able to continue to score? Because that's been the thing, man. Like, they are missing their top 3 of their top 6 forwards, and they haven't missed a beat. They've gotten a bunch of like production from people who are just stepping up. It's like the next man up thing. Now, when it comes to coaching, like you mentioned before, Maurice has been outcoached before. I give the slight coaching edge to Brenda Moore, and I really think that you can tell those guys, like, who was their prior coach? The guy who got fired by the Flames. I can't think of his name right now. He seems like a really pleasant guy. Bob Peters. Bob Peters was his name, I think. Bob Peters, I think, was his name. Peters was his name. They really love Rob Brindamore, man. He's done a very good job for them, man. Like, he he's re-energized that fan base because that fan base had kind of like they were struggling to get fans to come to games, man. Like there's a lot of good energy coming from this team the last 4 or 5 years, man. So um now what's really interesting to me too is like has who would you say has the edge in net?
It's tough because Anderson has looked slightly shaky, but he's still been pretty good.
Yeah.
And again, Bobrovsky, he's had like a really good postseason. Now Boston was getting to him late in the series. Like they were scoring goals. Like at the end of that series, Bobrovsky, you could say this. Bobrovsky won Florida the second round against the Leafs, but it was the Panthers offense that won that first round against the Bruins, especially those last two games.
Yeah.
So if I had to give just the like I'm talking about minuscule edge here,
Yeah.
I would slightly lean towards Freddie Anderson, but it's not
It's not that pronounced.
It's not such a gap.
It's not that pronounced. Yeah. I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna go Carolina in 7. I think that they're just gonna find a way to beat. I think they're gonna find a way to beat Florida. I think that what you're gonna see them do, they're gonna get bodies in front of Bobrovsky, and I think at some point, I think that the thing that's just so interesting about goaltending, it just takes one game and the person of them just being invincible, and then you get goals past them, and then they become mortal again. And that's what happened to Akira Schmidt against the Hurricanes. He turned into a mortal again. So I'm gonna go Carolina in 7, but like you mentioned before, if Florida wins this series, I won't be shocked, man. I won't be shocked. They have a lot of good mojo going for them at the moment. So
yeah, no, I don't blame you. I'm with you. I think I also have the Hurricanes. I have it slightly less. I have Hurricanes in 6 because I think while they aren't 100%, I think you look at Sebastian Aho, who in 11 games has 10 points. I think you look at, apparently Toivo Teravainen is supposed to come back at some point in this series.
Yeah.
Not sure about Svechnikov, but I've heard the rumblings that Teravainen is going to come back in this series. Him coming back should be a boon potentially. But I think this defense, the performance of the blue line, I've said this for years, JB. You probably agreed on this in the previous show. The Carolina Hurricanes have consistently fielded one of the best ranked blue lines over the last at least 3-4 years. Consistently top bottom throughout the lineup, two-way guys like Brett Pesce, phenomenal stay-at-home defenseman. Jacob Slavin, one of the I think underrated guys in this league in terms of his.
Oh yeah, he is.
He has a plus 14 in these playoffs. Now, yes, could you say he's on the ice so much for these Carolina goals? Yes, that's part of the reason why it's a plus 14. My counter argument: he's on the ice for so many of these goals for a reason.
Because he's good, and you play your really good guys a lot of times. And Brett Burns has been re-energized. He does not look like he's 38 years old, man. He looks like he's in his early 30s. He's been re-energized. Actually, he's found the fountain of youth in Carolina. And just for a selfish reason, Paul Stastny has played for a really long time, man.
Right.
Never made it to the finals before. I would love to see him get a crack at it because he's been
on some solid teams.
He's
played on Vegas. He's played on Winnipeg. He's played on Colorado. He's played on solid teams. I'm with you there. But my big thing is that whereas I think the Panthers wore down the Bruins, and I think they were just so easily able to manhandle Toronto, I don't think this is a team you can easily manhandle.
No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that.
Jordan Martinhook will fight back if you try anything with him. Brett Pesce and Brett Burns are both defensemen who, if you try to hit them, they're going to get back up. This is not a soft team, especially Rob. You're not allowed to be soft with Rob Brind'Amour as a coach. You're not.
Oh no,
it's illegal. I think this Carolina Hurricanes team, if there is a team built to withstand what the Panthers can dish out right now, it's the Carolina Hurricanes.
They're Hurricanes. Yeah, I would concur with. Yeah. And I think they're going to win the series, and I think that you're going to see them get bodies in front. I think you're going to see them get bodies in front of Bobrovsky, and they're going to make Bobrovsky uncomfortable, which the Maple Leafs didn't do. So
because Toronto was still from the strategy in the Tampa series of throwing shots from way farther out. That's not going to work against Florida, and this Carolina team they'll get in the slot, they'll get in the crease. This Carolina team will get dirty. This Carolina team will go at the goalie. They're gonna screen the guys. Brett Burns, I mean, you mentioned him, just the way that he starts plays for this Carolina Hurricanes offense. Even if he doesn't get an assist, he only has 8 points, and I say only strongly there, but he's a +8. Again, for a reason. I think this Carolina team is so well equipped, so well built, and I think for my prediction, for the first time since 2006, it's finally time for the Carolina Hurricanes to return to the Stanley Cup Final, and to do so against this Florida Panthers team. So, conference final predictions locked in. Now, there's one other aspect of the show that we were here to talk about before we finish up here, JB, and obviously it's in the title. The Oilers and Leafs post-mortem. Obviously, we mentioned it, both these teams losing in the second round, one losing in 6 games, one losing in 5 games. Let me just say anything for any Leafs or Oilers fans that are arguing with one another, because there are Maple Leafs fans that are like, well, why are the Oilers not getting as much as us for losing in the second round? There's reason for that. The Edmonton Oilers making the conference finals last season, losing to the eventual Stanley Cup champion Colorado Avalanche. Disappointing finish in the second round this season. Just the even strength, 5-on-5. Jay Woodcroft was not able to get that to its full potential. Power play was fantastic, but it was just the 5-on-5 that was the Achilles heel for Edmonton. Whereas Toronto,
and goaltending, 5-on-5 and goaltending were their Achilles heel. Yeah,
yes, absolutely. Whereas Toronto, the core 4 did not score basically at all. I have it. I believe I still have it saved. I had an image that detailed the stats of the core 4 guys of the Leafs. So in the 5 games against Florida, JB, Austin Matthews only had 2 assists. John Tavares only had 1 assist. Mitch Marner had a goal and 2 assists. $33 million for 1 total goal between those 3 players. Unacceptable. And when we talk about a post-mortem for these teams, it's not even so much, we're not going to detail the playoff series because we kind of already did that from the winner's perspective. What we are going to talk about is the future of these teams, because the Maple Leafs already had their end-of-season press conferences. I believe the Oilers have already had it. If they haven't, they probably will today. Locker room cleanouts and all that stuff. The sinking feeling in Toronto. Kyle Dubas is a free agent. They did not extend him through the season. The whole idea was you got to earn it. Yeah, they did win a playoff series finally for 19 years, but then they lose in the second round in the way they did. Brendan Shanahan and Kyle Dubas have been at odds with each other. If you follow the hockey news, you know that these two do not see eye to eye with everything. Brendan Shanahan actually turning down one of Kyle Dubas's trades from last year's deadline. I believe Brendan Hagel was the exact trade that Toronto was dead set on getting Hagel, and Brendan Shanahan nixed it. He said no to it. You have a coach in Sheldon Keefe who, let's just be real here, in his last 4 or 5 playoff series, he's gotten outworked by everyone. He got outcoached in this past one by Paul Maurice. He got slaughtered in back-to-back playoff series, I think, by John Cooper. The fact that both those series went to 7, or one series went to 7, one went to 6, where the Leafs won, I think is a testament to just the natural talent of the team.
And I mean, he got outcoached by Ducharme. Yes. And it's like, and he even got outcoached in the bubble by John Tortorella. I mean, like, you know, so here's my thing. And like, I just think that when you look at Toronto, and I know a lot of people are gonna say I'm being hard on them, but it's like there's a reason why they hadn't won a playoff series in 19 years. It's deeper than the playoffs.
Yep.
It's the front office. It's the front office and how they build the team. And it also, there's just a lousy culture around this team. It is. There's a reason why you have other teams who find themselves winning playoff series every year. They find themselves playing in conference championships. It starts at the top with the owner and with the front office and how they build stuff, and they're not building up. And even the media doesn't hold them accountable. You have people in the media saying, "Well, it's okay. Well, we won a playoff series this year. It took you 7 years to win a playoff series."
Yeah,
I mean, are you serious? Dallas has won multiple playoffs. They haven't won a cup since 1999. But you look at Dallas, their first year with Joe Montgomery, they beat the Predators. The next year, they made the finals in the bubble. They won 2 playoff series this year. You have a bunch of teams who are winning playoff series, and don't have the talent that don't have the high end talent that Toronto does.
Yeah.
And they're not a mentally strong team, and I blame that on ownership, and I blame that on the front office, and I blame that on the coaching staff.
Yeah.
They have kind of made it so where these guys think losing's okay. It's not okay. It's not okay. And, you know, people made fun of Giannis because Giannis said that, like, it was a stepping stone. Giannis can say that's a stepping stone because Giannis has won a championship before.
Exactly.
What's the stepping stone for the Leafs? What you lose these decisive games, and you lost to a team that was the number 8 seed when you had the bracket set up for you again. And I think that you have to. Okay, so look, you look at last year. Um, you look at last year. They lose Game 7 at home to Toronto. They eventually. I didn't feel that bad about it last year, but I think 2021 and then this year, you have to feel very bad because you had the bracket set up for you both times for you to at least make the conference finals and for you to maybe make the finals.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. The 2021 playoffs should have finished the job with Montreal. No excuses there. They should have been able to finish the job against Montreal, and they would have beaten Winnipeg in the next round too. I'm convinced they would have beaten Winnipeg.
Oh yeah, they would have. Yeah, they would have beat Winnipeg in this round. But it's like you.
Toronto doesn't do what they're supposed to do. I think it's the way to look at it.
They don't do what they're supposed to do. But like the only one of these young guys that even performs in the postseason is Nylander.
Yeah.
None of these other guys perform. Oh, Tavares is older. Tavares is a bit older. So I think that they knew when they signed that contract that the end of that contract was not going to be pretty. I think they knew that.
Yeah.
But I mean, Mitch Marner, we have 50-something playoff games of Mitch Marner not playing well.
Yeah.
I think he scored five playoff goals in 55 games. That's pathetic right there. Austin Matthews, you have scored 60 goals in a regular season. You couldn't score one goal against the Panthers. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, look, I'm going to throw back an NBA thing. We saw what happened to the Sixers on Sunday.
Yep.
Joel Embiid, it's clear that Joel Embiid at this moment, I'm not saying he can't get it, but it's clear at this moment that Joel Embiid and James Harden don't have that extra gear that you have to get to when you get into the playoffs.
Right.
Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner don't have it either.
Right.
They don't have it either. And you have tied up your cap so much into these four guys. And only one of them is really playing well for you in the playoffs. Nylander's the only one who really shows up in the playoffs, actually. He's the only one who shows up in the playoffs. If I'm Shanahan today and I'm talking to the people in the front office, I have to say this. Nylander's the only one who's safe, in my opinion. He's the only one who I think I can bring back next year because what's going to end up happening, they're a playoff team again next year.
Yeah.
It's going to come down to what they do in the playoffs again. And you just know they can't even win a decisive game. Well, let's just be honest, Jurg. Let's say that Tampa Bay wins that game 6 and it's 3-3. And game 7 come back. They lose that game. They're not winning that game. They would have lost that game. They would have lost that game again. And it's something, it's rotten with the players, but it goes up into the front office. It goes up to ownership and how they are doing this. And they need the best thing that they can do. They need to trade one of these guys. Right. They need to trade one of these guys, and they need to change the coach.
So that's actually perfect because I was about to ask, just generally, JB, of the core four, so Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander. And then of the power structure there, because it's 3 guys. So it's the core 4 and it's the power, and it's their triumvirate of decision makers. It's Keefe, Dubas, and Shanahan. Mm-hmm. Of those 7 guys, who's still going to be there next season? Because I'm going to be real with you, man. I think there's there's 2 scenarios to me that play out in my mind.
Yes.
There's a scenario where Shanahan stays. Mm-hmm. Oh, no, excuse me. No. There's a scenario where Dubas stays, but Shanahan is no longer the president. Dubas gets elevated to president, and he gets to hire his guy as GM, but Keefe is also gone. So that's one of the 2 scenarios for me. And the other one is just a total clean sweep because I think with Kyle Dubas, for all the good and bad, that's Shanahan's guy that he stuck to. Hired him as the assistant general manager, promoted him to the general manager spot. Rode with him this whole time. You get one bullet. Kyle Dubas was that bullet for Shanahan. Like bringing him in was his shot. Yeah. I think these 2 are tied together I think Shanahan is tied to Dubas to a point to where if Dubas is gone, I think Shanahan is gone because that's his guy. Like that was the guy you brought in. That was the guy you trusted. It was that Babcock was the first main decision as well. And then now with Keefe, you run out of bullets to me if you're Brendan Shanahan. To a point where either I think only one of them is still there next season. Either Shanahan is still there somehow, and he gets to bring in a new guy, or Dubas gets elevated to president, and then he hires his new GM and coach from there on.
Yeah.
In terms of those three. And then I think in terms of the core four, it's tough. I'm trying to see a possibility of if two of them are gone. I think one of them for sure is gone.
And I mean, with John Tavares isn't going to move. He has a no move clause. He's not going to move that. And I mean, here's my thing, man. Like, I thought that they were crazy when they signed that contract because you signed him to so long. That contract was not going to age well.
Right.
And you gave him a no move clause too. He's not going to move. He's not going to move. He's in the twilight of his career, and he's back in his hometown, and he's got a wife and kids. So you think he's going to want to go to bump? You think, hey, well, Cal, how about we send you, John? How about we send you to Arizona and we get Clayton Keller back? He's going to hang up the phone in your face. I mean, poor Clayton Keller will probably jump in there. He'll probably be like, shit, man, I'm not going to even see the playoffs in Arizona. We're moving to Tempe. Like, he's like, we're moving to fucking Tempe. Like, I mean,
with some news that came out today, JB, maybe Arizona to the Coyotes to Tempe isn't happening at all. So
okay.
That could potentially.
But let's get Clayton Keller out of Arizona. Let's get him so he can play in the playoffs because that kid he's a heck of a player, and he's probably the best player on a horrible team. Like, and to me, Phil Kessel isn't me. As Phil Kessel was always a little like chunky. He looks like he's got even fatter in Arizona. Like, he doesn't care anymore. He's like, well, I got 2 cups when I was in Pittsburgh. Yeah. I'm not gonna sniff a Stanley Cup anymore. I might as well live on this great food that they have out here in Arizona. Man.
Yes, but Arizona and Vegas in a couple seasons has just been a time for Phil Kessel, to say the very least.
Yes.
So last thing here for the Leafs before a brief convo on the Oilers, just with the Leafs, because you mentioned the no move clause for Tavares, and to be real, like, no move clauses, like, guys can still be traded with those. It's just basically I tell you where you can trade me thing. But I'm with you. I don't see a world where John Tavares A wants to be moved, and B I think he might arguably be the hardest of the deals to move because he still has 2 seasons of an $11 million cap hit after this. And with the bonuses, I just don't see him being. So it's up to these 3 guys. I know this might scare Leaf fans here, but it's Matthews, it's Marner, and it's Nylander. None of those guys have new move clauses yet. I believe Marner's no move clause is going to kick in July 1st of this offseason from his contract. I believe it might be a similar thing when it comes to Austin Matthews' deal here as well. Although Austin Matthews is the guy that everyone is pointing towards that they're going to get the extension with him. And Matthews does have a no move clause for the very final year of his deal.
Yeah.
I think for sure, definitively, this would be my last thing with it. I think Marner is done in Toronto. I think Mitch Marner is gone from Toronto. My only question is, does someone else from that core 4 get moved as well? I think that's my only thing. I think definitively one guy is done, and it's Mitch Marner. And I hate to say that because Mitch Marner has improved his game so much, but I think it's proven you can't keep all 4 guys. You
can't keep, and he doesn't play well. You have to find that extra gear in the playoffs, and none of them have. I mean, I hate to say this, John Tavares was a really, really good player, but I mean, you brought in John Tavares. He was he played in a losing organization with the Islanders, and like, you brought him in as like to be the leader of the team. Like, what is he leading? One playoff win. Like, how many years did he play with the Islanders? Like 8-9 years. One playoff win in 9 years.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he did teach them to do it. Like, it only took Matthews and them 2 less years to do it. I mean, I guess it is progress if you look at it. Yeah. But I mean, look, I think the only one of that you for sure can say, like, look, we can't really look at moving this guy's Nylander. Nylander is the only one. He's been the only one to me who has played well in the playoffs. Like when they've lost, he's played well. I mean, Matthews has had time like where he hasn't played well. Marner has just been a disaster, and Tavares he's not worth the money because he's old.
Yeah, and you can't trade him. You can't trade him at all. So it really comes down to, are you going to lose one of the other 3, or are you going to potentially have to part ways with 2? I think only definitively one, because I think the goal is to get Matthews signed to his extension this summer. Yeah. I think that's the goal. And then Nylander just had a career year, 40 goals. I think the ideal situation that if I'm a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, I know I'm ironically wearing this, guys. I'm not a Maple Leafs fan. I just had to wear the hockey shirt.
Yeah.
I think the ideal situation for Toronto is, again, it's just me personally. I know, take him for what he's done well, take him what he's done bad. Kyle Dubas has built this team. I think he deserves the chance to see it through, but in a different role. If I was MLSE, which hell of a lot of money if I was, only in a fantasy, but if I was MLSE, I'm making Dubas the president. I'm letting him pick his GM and his coach. That's the thing. If Dubas is president, you got to get rid of Keefe. Like that's
okay.
Cannot bring back Sheldon Keefe. I think it's got to be Dubas becoming president with a new GM and a coach. Well, obviously GM because you'd give him his own guy. But also then you have to trade Marner. You have to get rid of Marner because that is the key contract there of depending on what you get back, you could bolster maybe the bottom six. You could bolster that blue line. You need to be able to re-sign Samsonov because that was only a 1-year deal. And O'Reilly, he was a trade deadline acquisition. I think he brought so much to that team. I think you got to try to scratch and claw your way.
He was the only one who even really took accountability yesterday. He was the only one who took accountability and said, I have to be better. I want a Stanley Cup before. I want to, none of these Matthews and Tavares is kind of like, there's a losing culture there. Yeah. There's a losing culture there. And it's got to change slowly but surely. I think that you getting O'Reilly, but I mean, even when they brought in some of these veterans, it doesn't work. I mean, I thought that them bringing in Joe Thornton and Wayne Simmons a few years ago was going to help them on it, and it did. So, right. But like O'Reilly was the only one to me yesterday that I saw his press conference. He was the only one who took responsibility for what happened.
Yeah.
Where was Tavares and where was Matthews at? And I know that Toronto fans love Matthews, but I would maybe seriously consider looking into moving Matthews and Marner. I really would. Yeah, I would look into moving those two. I would keep Nylander, and you're just stuck with Tavares. Like, I mean, maybe you can try to sell Tavares on like Columbus.
It'll be tough. Yeah, no, it's. I remember I thought after the bubble. After that loss to Columbus, I thought that finally a move was going to occur with that core. But it's been a couple years since, and look, you won your playoff series. Like in essence, you did finally accomplish something. But also, I think the perfect thing I heard because I do listen to Leafs fans, like that's 1/4 of the way to the goal. At the end of the day, where no one is competing for winning a playoff series, they're competing for the Stanley Cup, and you only getting 1/4 of the way there is not good enough. No, it's not. So,
and let's just be honest too, man. Like you're judged by if you're able to win multiple playoff series in a season. I think that if you're making the conference finals, you have a very good team. You're making the finals, you're making a good team. You're winning the championship, you have the best team, but they haven't shown what even this year they were outplayed by Tampa Bay. Nothing that they've shown me tells me that this core guys can get them to at least the conference finals.
Right. I'm with you. JB, on that one. I think this will be a massive reconstruction for Toronto in this offseason. It's going to be a very much new look Leafs team going into next season. A little bit here on the Oilers before we wrap up. So let's look at things. We kind of mentioned before, I think goaltending, you have to hope Stuart Skinner gets better. Stuart Skinner, who you gave a 3-year extension to. So he's locked in for 3 more years after this. Campbell's locked into 4 more years. I don't think they'd be able to move out of Campbell. I think you just got to stick with those 2 guys in net going into next season. But here's where I think they do need to improve on. Look, Matthias Ekholm was a phenomenal addition this deadline. Yeah. He is a guy for sure. And Evan Bouchard's going to be a free agent. Look, he has defensive warts, but Jesus, offensively, he works so well in that team.
Oh, I know he does. Yeah, and he was a gamer. He played very well for them. In the I mean, I just think that they need to get more kind of grit on that team. Like I feel like that team is missing kind of a physical, kind of like just like a physical guy who's able to score a bit in the bottom 6. I feel like that they're missing that, but they need to get better. They need to get better at 5-on-5 hockey because smart teams are not going to take penalties. And you think about this too, like let's just be honest. Like let's say they take a couple of penalties a game. Even if they scored at a 20% rate or a 25% rate in the series, it wouldn't have been good enough for them to win because they were so bad in 5-on-5. So I mean, like they have to do something about the 5-on-5 hockey. Now, I think with Skinner, you have to hope that he gets better. And I think that one thing, and maybe I'm being a bit delusional by saying this, you have to kind of maybe temper your expectations a bit because he didn't go into camp being your number one goal. He was supposed to be your backup, and you throw him into
Yeah.
the fire. So you're hoping that maybe next time around he'll be a little better. But what they've done, what they've had the last few years, it's just been goal. It's been team building malpractice. Like you had Mike Smith as your goalie last year.
And Mikko
Mike
Koskinen.
and Mikko where's Mikko Koskinen? Where is
I think he
Mikko
went
Koskinen?
overseas. I think he went overseas.
Yeah,
I think he left the NHL.
yeah. Mikko Koskinen, I saw him like he was a rookie. I'm like, this guy's like 30 something. He's like, yeah. Well, never mind. I don't want to come off as being like ageist. Like,
Right. No,
yeah.
he was only there for so long because Peter Chiarelli randomly gave him a deal, which hockey fans memed so badly when he gave that extension, because I think it was like a 3-year deal, about $4 million per. And the joke on hockey Twitter was that Chiarelli basically said like, "Hey, we'll give you $4 million," and Koskinen's group was like, "Okay, good." And then it's like, "All right, 3 years, $4 million each," and Koskinen's group was like, "Oh damn, he means $4 million a year. Yeah, we'll take that." Like the joke was that because there's no reason he should have been signed to that contract. There's just no reason. It was one of the many mishaps of Peter Chiarelli, and honestly, Ken Holland hasn't done like
a long career of mishaps by Peter Chiarelli.
Like from Chiarelli, and now Holland is just so much needs to be improved on this team. I think I was mentioning the defense earlier. I think you need to somehow find a way. Like Kulak and Ceci just did not play good in this postseason. I don't think they played great. And look, I would move Darnell Nurse if I could, but I don't think there's any chance that they're able to move Darnell Nurse because after this season, he's got 7 years left with a cap hit of $9.25 million each in the next 7 seasons. As a Chicago Blackhawk fan with Seth Jones on the roster, Edmonton, my heart weeps for you. I understand pain. Trust me, because that contract is immovable. And then you look at the forward core. Will Hyman be able to replicate his production? Will Nugent Hopkins be able to replicate his production from the season? Dude had 100 points for the first time in his career. I'm not sure if that's going to happen again. And then Evander Kane kind of underperformed this season. I know he was a little bit hurt, but underperformed this season. Didn't make the same impact in the playoffs as he did last year when he was like a goal-scoring machine. But I'm with you. Ultimately, I think, because again, I don't think you could do anything to the goalie tandem. I think it's got to be retooling the blue line, and it's retooling the bottom 6. And I think that's what has to happen for Edmonton here. And if we just briefly look, and this will be the last thing that I kind of mentioned here, if you just briefly look at what they could do going into next season, as of now, the projected cap hit for this team is not a lot, only $6 million. So if it's still Ken Holland there, or if they maybe somehow grow a little bit more brain cells and find a way to get rid of him, you got some roster construction there to do, but not the overall sweeping changes of the Maple Leafs. And that's why, kind of to close it out, there's a reason why these two teams, while the failing is similar, there's a difference in the paths they take, because Toronto needs a complete top-down, full restoration of things. Whereas with Edmonton, I think Jay Woodcroft can be the guy there. I think he can be the guy, because he's also, you have to give him credit as the guy that helped guide them through last season to the conference finals, because he was hired mid-season, or at least 30 games in after the firing of the previous coach. And Edmonton didn't start great this season, but were able to rally. So I think you got to give him a chance. I think it's retooling to this roster, slight retooling that this team needs compared to the Leafs and a lot of the other teams that we talked about, ultimately speaking. But yeah, that is just about. That's my postmortem for both these teams. Any final notes, JB, before we
I definitely agree with you. Edmonton and Toronto are not the same, man. Like I think that Edmonton, they've won playoff series before. They've had success. They made the conference finals, and like they lost to a really good Vegas team, and goaltending 5-on-5 play let them down this time around. I think Edmonton is in better shape than Toronto is. Toronto is in kind of a situation. This offseason could change the course of their franchise for a while, depending on what happens. Whereas Edmonton, I don't think, unless like Ken Holland and Peter Chiarelli like come together and start throwing like darts at the dartboard like while drinking vodka, I don't think that anything bad's going to happen to Edmonton like a few years down the line. So.
Oh God, if Peter Chiarelli somehow finds a way to get back in that organization, I think just nightmare fuel, definitively, because that is the guy that brought Milan Lucic there. So, oh Lord.
Yes.
But no, that beautifully said, and we're in agreement there. Both teams need changes. One needs bigger changes compared to the other. One needs some retooling. But hey, That's it for the postmortem. That's it for the conference finals. That's it for the playoffs. And that's it for this. JB, appreciate you hitting me up for this, man. Sometimes I feel like I don't get to talk hockey enough, so I appreciate you coming up with this. And we could definitely do this maybe going into the Stanley Cup final, or if we can't figure out the time, maybe after the Stanley Cup final when all is said and done. But I appreciate you being able to hop on and talk some hockey with me. Anything you want to tell the people before we head out now?
Oh yeah, no, man. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I'm Jamie B Foodie on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram. And yeah, man, that's about it. It was pleasure talking hockey because I don't get a chance to talk hockey a lot either. So
yeah, man, I feel you. So ultimately, JB, thank you for joining me on this. This was an absolute ball to have. Anyone who watched this throughout the last hour and a half or so, thank you so much. Definitely will look forward to trying to do this once or twice, and definitely we'll try to get potentially get JB on one of my podcasts I do, the Somewhat Sports podcast that I do on a weekly basis with some friends of mine, to say the very least. JB, thank you so much. Again, this was fun, brother. Anyone that's watched this, again, thank you. Take care, everyone.
All right, man.